At Corston, we believe that good design is more than about just how it looks. It's about how it feels, how it functions, and how it lasts, and where possible, gets better in time. As the seasons shift and the nights draw in, the home becomes more than a space, it's a sanctuary. Today, as part of London Design Festival, we're sitting down with some of the most inspiring voices in interiors, design, and journalism to explore how to prepare the home for winter. From the way lighting can transform a room to the textures that invite you to linger, we'll talk about the details that elevate everyday living. So settle in, this is a conversation about design that's just as much about feeling at home as it is about style. So when you think about hunkering down for winter, what feelings spring to mind?
For me, it's warmth, obviously, and coziness, and that warmth translates into something you can see, but also you can feel. So obviously, put the heating on, but like it's that coziness and that feeling of warmth, really. So what people.
Yeah, I think it's sort of spending time indoors. If you've got a fireplace, sitting around the fire and like watching a film in the afternoon, and as you said, feeling cozy and stuff like that.
And then is preparing the home for winter more of like a style choice, or like you said, Chloe, is it more about comfort for everybody? Do you have any kind of traditions that evoke those moments in your homes?
I think it's about being practical, so keeping warm. I think if you've got kind of lighter fabrics, things like curtains, you might have sheer curtains for summer. And I think sort of swapping those for your lined, thicker curtains. So you're drawing in, because the evenings are drawing in, you want to sort of draw in the coziness, adding some extra lighting because it's getting darker. I think it's preparing to be inside and feel comfortable.
That's great to hear that there's some transitional changes that you would usually recommend making at home. Do either of you two have anything that you tend to do either in your household?
I like to bring out a thicker blanket, so sometimes we'll have like a nice thin one for summer because you just never know when you want something cozy. But in the winter, I like to have nice thick quilt sort of like so when I would usually be out in the evenings, maybe gardening or spending time in the garden. In the winter, you don't have that luxury or privilege because of the nights drawing in earlier. And spend more time, so it's like a movie night or something to bake in the kitchen. But if you're spending time sort of getting cozy around fire or around TV to watch film, you want something a bit more cozy, like a thick duvet. So, or like a thick duvet, like sort of throw, if that makes sense. So that's what I would do.
And then do you see the shift in lighting throughout the season? There's a real opportunity to, kind of transition the design style. So Cohen kind of mentioned curtains and that kind of thing.
Yeah, and I think it's also the house is naturally going to be darker a lot earlier, so it's being practical with your lighting as well, and maybe adding some extra table lamps out and about so you can have that calm, relaxed, warm feeling in the evenings, and like having, adding a table lamp on your console table in the hallway, just so you're passing through and you've got little sort of areas of light still. It makes you feel a bit happier inside, I think. And where you've got opportunities to add things like wall lighting, picture lighting, having the sort of zoned lighting, so you're still benefiting from warmth of light, but it's not quite natural light. But I think working with warmer bulbs and things, you're still getting that feeling of the sunshine even inside.
In that, Tanya, when you mentioned before that you saw a beautiful shadow cast on a wall from one of the trees.
Yes.
So, working with kind of different external pieces of lighting and curtains seems like a really good way to kind of bring the outside in a little bit as well.
Yeah, definitely.
What you do around your own home, thinking about those shadows.
So I think we're really lucky. We live in an area where we have a TPO zone, so a lot of the trees are quite large and they're old, they're beautiful, and the light casts through the branches and dances. So when the sun gets real low in the winter time, you get these lovely light sort of casting through. I keep talking to my boyfriend about putting some lovely linen sort of sheer curtains up so that it's practical in the sense of you've got a little bit of privacy, although our garden's quite private, but the sheerness, the light still comes through. And as Chloe was saying, lighting for us in our house, I'm really lucky. My boyfriend's an electrician, so we've connected a lot of our lighting up to like our Google Home Mini. So we say, "Hey Google, turn on the lights," and we always have mood lighting, we try to steer clear of the big light in our house. We like zoned and lighting so it feels cozier, but natural light, there's less of it in the winter, and you never know what you're going to get, whether it's going to be a sunny day or it's going to be a cloudy day, and you just have to make the most of it. And as Chloe was saying, that if you can incorporate that warmth and that glow inside that you would really crave from the sunshine, you don't get much of it in the winter. It's a really nice substitute, and it just makes you feel more homely when you're coming home. So things like timers, I think having a timer set for lighting is lovely, so that you're not coming home to this cold, dark space. You can set your heating. You should set your timers on your lighting too, so you come home and the whole light that you have on your console table is on, and it's warm, and it just feels welcoming. It's really nice.
That's really interesting. I think people traditionally think about timers as something you leave on when you might go on holiday and, to show that the lights are on in the home, but actually using them on the daily kind of regular basis is something I hadn't thought of.
Yeah,
so that's a very, very point.
It's really deadline. I don't know if you can incorporate that in your project, but I think it's a really nice way of it's practical because it's something you don't have to think about, because you might come in and life can become so functional. You come home from work, you go into the kitchen, you start cooking, or you get ready, you have a shower, that you'll forget to turn the lighting. So it's an extra step in the routine that you just don't think about, especially if you transition from summer to winter quite quickly. Whereas having that timer set, it just takes one less thing off your mental load, and you get to enjoy your home a bit more.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think we often have clients where they're privileged enough to have a separate circuit, so we can have all of your smaller lighting on a separate system, so you've just with the flick of a switch all your table lamps come on. But having a timer is a great shortcut for doing that and adding that coziness. And even if you're not in that room, knowing you've got a couple of little lamps in there, just so it kind of makes your home still feel completely accessible in the evenings. That's a lovely way of doing it.
And do you see traditions play out slightly differently, or kind of those transitional details dependent on the property style? So you mentioned, types of lighting, table lamps, etc. Is that something, property style to property style, you would maybe recommend different things within?
And I think as well, it depends on the style and how traditional the property is. Perhaps you can be more playful with the lighting, with something a bit older, and also where you've got opportunities to add things like picture lights. That's a lovely way of having a bit of subtle lighting in an area where you're passing through, like a hallway, but having a couple of pieces of artwork. But there are now so many ranges of things where you could either have some wall lights. I think any kind of lighting is brilliant, and I think you can mix and match the styles as well really well, but just adding a fun shade is quite a good way of doing it.
Right, so it feels as though golden rules for transition into winter, soft furnishings and lighting choices in place.
For sure, yeah. And I think like Chloe was saying about in an older property, I mean, we have a 60s build, so it's like in between a period and new. It's quite a hard one, I think, to get right. Whereas we picked some lovely sort of brown wall lights, and we tried to steer clear of spotlights because it makes the ceiling feel a bit lower and it feels a bit more functional as a space. But they do add so much more warmth in the areas that you're passing by. And I have a picture in the hallway that probably could do with a picture like that. Now I'm thinking about it.
Yeah.
I think the colour of your walls is so important as well, isn't it? If you have a dark painted room that feels really nice and cosy, you still kind of need more light in it than you would if the room was painted white or off-white. It makes such a difference. When you repaint, you might need to rethink your lighting as well.
Absolutely. I think when we were talking about sort of period properties, we were saying about how they can really take those darker colours, especially if you're sort of colour drenching a room in a beautiful navy or a dark green. That's a great opportunity then to have some beautiful brass to sort of contrast and have these wall lights and picture lights. So it's still moody, but it's more atmospheric. And I think especially for the winter, that's like a lovely way of creating a nice, like, cosy feeling.
I went to a house the other day, and they'd cook in their main bedroom in this beautiful green dark forest forest green colour, sorry. And then they'd put lovely side lamps on the table, and it was just lovely. It was a room that was naturally dark, and they just complemented it even more by making it feel like this sanctuary, cocoon space. And she said, "I know it's not for everyone, but I think it's really lovely. You don't need a lot of light in bedrooms. It's not the space you spend the most time. You want it to be quite dark. You want it to be cosy." And as you were saying about painting, we picked our back living room is south facing, so we get a lot of sunlight in there. But in the winter, you get less light, so we tried to pick a colour that would glow even in the winter, and that makes a big difference, definitely. And it makes you feel, like you mentioned, like authentic, and it's true to you. You feel cosy in your own space.
Yeah. On the subject of paint, I'm seeing an increasing amount of property where the ceilings are being used as a fifth wall. So how do you feel that kind of comes into conversation around houses becoming quite cosy in the winter and colder months?
I think it's if you have a room, particularly in a room with lower ceilings, if you have a definite colour on the walls and then you have a bright white ceiling, it can feel really jarring. I think if you have a room with high ceilings and it's a period property, and it would feel strange having it all painted in quite a strong colour with the ceiling as well. And I think also, I mean, I've just repainted my hallway in a really nice kind of warm blue colour, but it's much darker than it was before. And we have kept the ceiling white because it would have felt too dark coming into this, you know, everything being the same colour. But I think in a smaller room with lower ceilings, it's really nice to just take the wall colour over the ceiling as well.
Amazing. So you see it play out in paint. Is there anything else kind of architecturally you're seeing around at the moment? I think I've seen a few articles on panelling and some other interesting kind of nuances.
Yeah, I think adding kind of architectural elements like picture rails, dado rails, and your cornice as well, like painting that in a contrast colour. Any of your woodwork can be a really nice way if you want that kind of light and airy feel, but just having a slight shift in the paint palette with a slightly darker or lighter woodwork colour is a really nice way of still keeping like a cosy wrapping round feeling but adding a bit of interest. And then panelling is obviously a great way, and you can manipulate how your space feels in terms of whether your panelling's horizontal or vertical, just to play with the dimensions a bit and either give a bit more coziness or a bit more height.
So you mentioned cornicing as well. I think that probably isn't given the airtime that it probably deserves, because clearly it's quite an important feature within a room. Tanya, I know that you mentioned you went for a plaster cornice.
Yeah.
How does that kind of play out in different spaces, and what benefit are different styles to certain room types?
I mean, we sell a lot of period property that have really beautiful original ornate cornice, and then when sellers or homeowners start thinking about extending and changing spaces, you often end up losing a piece of that cornice. So I was saying off camera, it's a real craft. We recently had some put in our house, and it was stepped cornicing, so kind of Art Deco style, to make the space feel bigger and make the ceiling feel like it was continuing to go up, and then colour drips the ceilings. But where I think, you know, something really beautiful and big and ornate wouldn't have gone in a 60s bungalow, of course, but in a period property, it's really beautiful. And then it coming back to the colours, and you're saying about picture rails, I've seen some really bold colour choices where people will stop the colour at the picture rail and then change the colour, or they'll have white walls and maybe a lovely pink tone, maybe nurseries and children's bedrooms. I've seen this is lovely, but they'll take the colour up from the picture rail all the way over the ceiling and colour the cornice too. And I think the cornice adds depth and it adds charm, especially in a period property. It's a really nice way to just add a layer of character and warmth to a space. And we see a lot of places where people have taken them out and that people move in and say, actually, we're going to put them back in. And it's a really good idea for it, I think, for a period property. But even non-period, but we took ours out, it was just a curve. The step looks really lovely. But I think it's about finding that balance. You don't want it to be too big if your ceilings are low, but you don't want it to be too small if your ceilings are high, because you can take advantage of that height by putting something really big and ornate in.
We are seeing like an increase in new build property as well, which, you know, people often want to add more character in. So how might, you know, those kind of additions to character play out? I've seen also ceiling roses and things like that being integrated into what are traditionally kind of two-dimensional spaces. How are you seeing that playing out within the industry?
So I think there's a big need for adding character back into the new builds, and I think other than sort of your architectural elements like your cornicing, a really nice way. We had a project recently where we combined 2 rooms into one big master suite, and the ceiling was vaulted, and we added some wooden trusses in to create the element of the beams, because the house originally had farmhouse elements to it. So we wanted to add that character, and that, although that's a really bright, airy room, it's just added that depth and warmth and a bit of character, especially if you're getting reclaimed beams. That's like a lovely way of adding a bit of depth. Whether you've got a fireplace and you need to change the surround or add a bit of wood there, I think anything like that, or just some reclaimed old shelving, is a lovely way in a kitchen where you can break out a bit of the cabinetry and have some natural materials, because I think that's often what the new builds seem to be lacking. And I think having that contrast can be quite interesting, especially if you've got like colder windows. If they're aluminium, they might be darker. Bringing in those natural woods will just create that balance and that authenticity we were talking about.
That and the balance, to add to that as well, if you don't mind, Chloe, I see a lot of people sometimes put IKEA shelves in because they're cheap and they're easy, but actually it's so effective to go out and get something reclaimed, and it's cost effective, and it's effective in the sense of the charm that you bring to your home, and you can get something beautiful like a new beautiful brass or polished nickel bracket that goes quite well with a reclaimed wooden. You can get scaffold boards, you can get floorboards. Going to a reclamation yard is really fun because you just don't know where this piece has come from, and it adds some depth and character to the space that would feel otherwise quite new and maybe a little bit lacking character, but adding that charm in, and it doesn't have to cost a fortune either. Like say reclamation yards are a nice way to find an old piece and then put that new spin on it with something that's quite aged and beautiful. I like the brass brackets, they're beautiful, finished, or
It's really good that you mentioned the reclamation yard actually, because I was thinking actually, where does somebody start when they want to look at, integrating more natural materials or reclaimed materials in? Is there anywhere else that you'd recommend looking for to integrate those kind of pieces in?
I think antiques fairs, flea markets, anything like that, they'll often even sell, I mean, Facebook Marketplace is also brilliant for things like people are doing a house clearance, they might be getting rid of an old stone surround from a fireplace, someone else can then repurpose that, and that's a brilliant way of doing it. A lot of places, as I say, particularly my house, actually the fireplace has been taken out, but we've still got the chimney breast. So adding in an old surround just creates a little bit of a focal point. Even if you haven't got a fireplace, it's still like a beautiful decorative piece that just gives that character back. And I quite like having a central focal point in a living room, where we spoke about sort of being cozy in the winter. It's all sitting around something. And whether if you're lucky enough to have a fire, that's brilliant. But if not, creating that focal point with some kind of reclaimed piece or a big bit of artwork. So the room is centered around something. Flea markets, I think charity shops are a great way of doing it, but a lot of reclamation yards are brilliant. There's Burgess Reclamation in Oxfordshire, which is just wonderful. They do great open days, and they've just got a real mixture of things. Even for the garden, you can get old bathtubs and things that could be used as a dog wash. I love kind of that element of being quite playful with it.
It feels very sustainable as well. I think that's the beautiful thing about going to a reclamation yard or an antiques fair. You're bringing life back to something that has maybe gone unloved over the years, or someone else has had their joy out of it, and actually it's ready for a new owner, and you've got something that's had a story. And sometimes you go to I was recently I went to about Ardingly, and that was really great fun, because sometimes people, they picked these pieces up and they would know the story behind the piece, and then you take it home, and when you've got people and guests around, you tell them the story of that piece, and it's just lovely. So I think that the vintage fairs are a great way to do it. There's some more sort of like modern era ones, like the 60s sort of style, which are like Hackney Flea Market's a good one, and that's a really nice one. I've not been yet, I've just heard great things, so I'm quite looking forward to going to that.
And there's some great companies as well now making reclaimed vanity units and things, taking an old chest of drawers and putting a sink in. That's a really good way of doing it as well.
Love that.
You can find, if you just want a small piece of stone as well, you can find offcuts, I think, at stone yards. And, I've seen people who have made a small kitchen island from an offcut of marble that they bought for £150, and then have got an old, chest or piece of tall table and put the marble on top and turned it into a kitchen island. It looks really great and just really cost-effective way of doing it.
How important do you feel lighting a space for the winter months is?
It's so important. I mean, as Chloe said earlier, you have the lights on so much more over the winter, and you want different types of lighting at different times of the day. You need task lighting in certain spaces like the kitchen, the bathroom. You want a cozier light in the living room and in the bedroom. And I think, as we've all said, that's where layering comes in. So wall lights that you can use, table lamps that you can use, ones that you can have all the lights on at the same time, or just a few, depending on what you're doing. And also lighting the garden in winter as well. I think we all think of garden lighting as a summer thing, something that you think about doing over summer. But actually in winter, if you have big glass doors opening onto your garden, which so many of us do, and you don't have curtains, over the winter, by about 4 o'clock in the afternoon, you're just looking at this dark square. Whereas if you've lit your garden really well, then it sort of extends your home out into the garden. And even if all the leaves have gone, your lights can be sort of casting the shadows of the tree branches onto your fence or your wall, which again is beautiful in itself.
It's such a good point because people labour over their gardens throughout the spring and summer months, don't they, to make them beautiful, ready for hosting and ready to kind of enjoy the warmer months. But actually, it's easy to neglect, to kind of forget about them at this time of the year. So, Chloe, what would your kind of guidance on laying lighting be in the home and those kind of transitional lighting moments?
So I think lighting, also people forget, it can direct you to where you need to go. So I think being functional with it, as Jess was saying, with task lighting, but maybe being subtle with it. So you might have a spotlight somewhere in a back of house area and then having some beautiful wall lights next to it. So you can have that layered lighting where you're cooking, you might want a bit of extra light. And then once something's popped in the oven and you're not prepping anymore, you've got that cozy feeling again. But using that lighting, for example, in the garden to light a path somewhere so it extends your vision again is really nice. And the same way as in the evenings, you might have your bathroom lighting, say, on a sensor system. So you're kind of guiding people to the bathroom in the middle of the night. It's practical, but it's still looking nice and it's still a helpful addition in the home.
And then I know that we've had a conversation. You'd mentioned about the purpose of lighting. You'd mentioned about the cooking spaces, but versus preparation spaces. How does that play out in the rest of the home, do you think?
So I think it's being careful with your spotlights, and spotlights are really useful for things like spaces like we said about your kitchen and maybe your utility room, where you need to put makeup on in the bathroom, but it's partnering that with something that looks beautiful as well and thinking about exactly where that lighting is. For example, with makeup, it's quite an important one, positioning it so you're getting the most flattering angle in the mirror and not casting too much shadow. Dressing rooms, we think about that a lot, and not littering the ceiling with spotlights just for the sake of it, and thinking, okay, well, we've got a line of spotlights here, but a pendant at the end would be lovely because we've got the dining table centered underneath it. And we tend to think about that a lot when we're designing, about the sort of sight line of lighting, and whether it's going to be one path or whether we've got it dotted around to create like a scattered light. It's thinking about how you want the space to feel and how much lighting you're putting into it, really.
I love the practical element that you brought in there, and that makes me think about the ways of controlling lighting as well. So toggle switches, dimmers, etc. Do you think either of those could be seen as a bit of a luxury in design essentials in terms of how someone feels it operates in a space?
I love dimmers. I think they're a really beautiful way of taking something that is task lighting. I don't have any spotlights in my kitchen. I have a pendant and wall lights, and I keep asking my boyfriend to put a dimmer in because I just want to change the ambience sometimes. It's really nice for the big light to tone the big light down, and we see it in clients' houses. We do a lot of twilight shooting in the winter because it's the best way to showcase a home. You've got that the cold that is outside, you've lost all the leaves from the trees, and you're trying to showcase how warm a home feels, and there's nothing nicer than taking those shots in the winter in the evening time and looking into a warm house where the lights are just right. So it's a really nice way to set the scene, I think.
I'm finding that pendant lights are increasingly popular as well. How are you guys seeing those being used in the properties you're visiting?
Oh, I love a pendant light. I think it's creating a focal point, isn't it? And sort of a place to gather where it's your dining table over a big coffee table or ottoman in the living room. And also in your hallway, it's quite a nice sort of piece, especially if you've got a period property. It's like a little focal point, but you can have quite a lot of fun with it. Choosing like a playful shape, like a star, is quite a nice way where you can have the classic elements, but a bit of a fun twist.
And do you think there's a bit of a recipe for selecting the right sizes or the right quantities of pendant lighting in a space? I think kitchen islands are often spoken about, or above dining tables, because they kind of have confined parameters, don't they?
I think it's making sure that when you're in that space, whether it's around the dining table, you're not being totally blinded and overwhelmed and trying to see past things. I always think about sight lines. So when I'm walking into the space, where kind of am I going to be standing to get that first view, and then where am I going to be spending the rest of my time in that space? So if it's a kitchen island, you might be going, okay, well, I come in this way, and if you've got 3 bar stools, it seems natural to have 3 pendant lights. But I think it's just being mindful of your eye lines and making sure you can take in the rest of the space and not letting the lighting dominate the scheme. It's just kind of working alongside the rest of the pieces.
Some of the best houses we see, the lighting has been really beautifully curated to complement the space it's in. And I think having a conversation with a good interior designer or even an electrician, some electricians have got a really good eye for lighting. And they would say, you could ask them about the light that you're looking at and say, do you think this would work in this space? And it's really key. The amount of times I bought a light and then I get it home and Nathan says to me, that's not dimmable. And so it's not practical for the space. People don't consider that. So having a conversation with a professional is a really good thing to do. And then also figuring it out, like say, to make sure it goes in that space. Like Chloe said, some of the beautiful houses that we sell that have a lovely hallway, they'll pick up a really lovely vintage glass chandelier, and it's a really nice way to sort of set the tone of the house. This statement is, this is my home, welcome into my home. I've seen a few lovely grand chandeliers which are lovely, some a bit more understated but really pretty, curated. Yeah, it's a really nice way.
So there are a couple of different elements of selecting the right lights for the right places and time of year that we're discussing here. My mind then goes to the temperature of the bulbs. What would be your advice or kind of preference leading into those kind of hazier, colder evenings?
We tend from a property perspective, when we're shooting and the light is limited or it's lower in the winter months, we will always lean towards warmer light rather than the cold light because it makes the space feel more warm. Warm glow is you get a warm glow from the sun, you don't get a cold glow, you get a cold glow from the moon, but then you should be asleep. I kind of look at it quite a little bit holistically. So from my perspective, from a property perspective, I think it's really nice to have a warm, and I personally lean towards warm. My electrician boyfriend also leans towards warm. So I like warm lighting, and anything gives a nice glow and just a nice hue. It sets the ambience, honestly.
And then light diffusion. So I think when we're speaking about all these different types of lights, you get different results from all of them, don't you? So actually, is there a preference in statement lighting that you look towards in these winter months?
I think a statement pendant light, as we were talking about, that can be a work of art in itself, really. We were talking earlier about the ceiling being like a fifth wall, and then if you have a beautiful sort of sculptural chandelier hanging from it, it can really draw attention to it. And actually, when the light is on as well, the reflections that the light can cast onto the ceiling and the walls, that can be really beautiful and something that can make you appreciate being at home in the evening and turning on the lights.
And paired with a dimmable switch, actually, that creates a really nice cozy, but also starlit ambiance.
I think something that is nice, and we've recently put them in our home, is something like a brass socket and switch that lets the light dance on it, and as you walk past you get that different shade that goes across it from the warmth of the light. It is nice, it's warm, it makes you feel, I lean towards warmth, so it makes me feel authentic to myself, it makes me feel cozy in my own home. That's really nice. And the way that light is diffused, we've recently just put some doors in where we had lack of light in our hallway. We put reeded doors in, so reeded glass in the middle, and just lets the light cast in nicely, and you just get, like, say, warmth a lot, but it is like that feeling of warmth rather than the practicalities of a warm home in winter. It's both at the same time.
And then, do you think there are any particular lighting faux pas that you see people kind of make within designing their own home?
I think it's if you only have an overhead light and that's your only option for lighting your room, that's it's really limits you as to the kind of atmosphere you can create in a room. And you can't, obviously everyone can just add lamps, but it's really paying attention to where the lamps are going to go and make sure you're lighting the right places and that you don't have dark corners. Because I think that can make you feel quite cold and not comfortable in a room where there's a dark space. You kind of want every space to have the right amount of light.
I think we're really lucky that we get to see so many homes, and we sell so many homes that are quite design-led. Our clients got a really beautiful eye for details. They're really curated. But in past years, I've seen some people put too many spotlights in, so it just feels like there's an overwhelming amount of light, and it can feel quite clinical and sterile. And then sometimes, just too much cool lighting. I think warmth is definitely, the warm light is nicer to have and make it feel more homely.
Yeah, so if you are kind of given the shell of a new build as an example, and I traditionally see those with the lock spotlights, and
at times a limited opportunity to integrate additional lighting in. I think there's one element of the financial kind of side, which if you've just bought a new house, you probably don't want to consider getting lots of things rewired. But are there any kind of versatile options that you could suggest to make kind of that situation a little bit more cozier?
I think it is. It's flexible lighting. So we were talking about table lamps, also portable lamps. I think again in talking about seasonal changes in autumn and winter, candles are obviously the oldest way to light a room, but can bring so much atmosphere and also gives you the opportunity to bring in fragrance as well. I think sort of scented candles that can really different fragrances for different times of the year. It can really affect your mood in a positive way if you have a really lovely warming sort of smoky fragrance in autumn, winter. It makes you feel cozy, you're happy to be at home. And it can sort of signal the end of the working day as well. Sort of if you work at home, you can light a scented candle, change the mood of a room instantly.
That's a really good topic, actually, scented candles. I feel like your face is lit up at that time.
When we sell the homes that we sell best are, they've always thought about all the senses. Sometimes we had a client that was a baker, she was an influencer, and she made sure she had fresh focaccia baked on the day, and you could just smell this lovely smell of bread. They had, most of our clients will light a really beautiful bougie candle, so a diptyque. I really like diptyque candles. I was very kindly given one as a gift last year. It was beautiful, and I just love the smell of it, and they look lovely, they look nice on the side, they smell gorgeous, and that kind of welcoming, it's like you're igniting all the senses. Something looks lovely, that's why people come to see it in person and view it in our case, and then they come in and they're like, oh, it smells so nice, what's that? And often we'll show people around and they decide not to buy the property. They're like, what's that smell, what's that candle? And it's just a nice way, it's a layer that you can't see, that you can smell. It's that beautiful texture of making you feel welcome in a space. So, and it's a nice way to light the room and make it feel cozy, and also like a ritual. The things that you don't get to do in the winter, like I like gardening. You don't get that luxury in the winter. You can spend a bit more time inside, and you feel like it's like a nice ritual to light a candle at the end of the day, and you feel like it's a bit cozy and just it's really nice. It sells houses well, definitely having a nice gable on.
I can imagine. I'm a big advocate of home fragrance. So if it doesn't feel cozy enough or dark enough of an evening to have a candle on, there's always a diffuser out. Do you guys have any go-to scents in the winter months that you kind of swap out from what you may have used earlier on in the year?
It's always anything that says something like fireside for me. So it is that sort of, smoky, almost sort of wood smoke type fragrances. Just instantly makes you feel warmer and cozier.
Tobacco and oud. I love the smell of tobacco. Tobacco and vanilla is really nice. But we have more sort of go-to ones.
Yeah, I think anything similar, or like amber. I quite like a sort of clean smells of amber mixed with something that's maybe a bit fresher is quite nice as well. Still quite moody, or like a fig is gorgeous if you want something a bit lighter.
I'm with you. I love those. I'm kind of a very sweet scented person. That's what my nostrils tend to enjoy quite a lot. So I think I'm like a amber, a cinnamon, or any of those kind of spiced smells that I find.
Cinnamon is a lovely one to have, especially in winter as you go towards Christmas. Really nice one.
So which materials and textures automatically scream winter to you?
I think wood. I think of wood when I think about winter, because you'd light wood on a fire to make it cozier. So wooden flooring, beams. You work a lot with that in your high-day gear.
Yeah, and I think also think about your soft textures like walls, sheepskins, lovely way of adding a bit of boucle, that sort of like cozy texture on your harder finishes like your woods.
So speaking about fabrics and kind of different materials, that's not just a sort of furnishing. That's light fittings it applies to as well. So how might somebody use that in the home to make a space more cozy?
So I think shades are a really great way of changing the feel of the lighting and adding an extra layer of texture. We spoke about new builds and adding a bit of interest. If you've just got some beautiful pendants with a rattan shade against just a very simple painted wall, you're already going to have a bit of contrast and depth. I think the shade will determine the feel of the light. So you might have a really pretty glass pendant and it's more sort of directional then, or you can diffuse the light with a soft linen shade. And then you can add a bit of playful elements with the shades as well. It's a nice way of upgrading something really quickly, you know, changing a wall light shade to a fun stripe or like a little scalloped edge. It changes the feel totally from then just a really sort of elegant plain card shade, and I think they're really like a nice cost-effective way of mixing things up.
And then more broadly speaking, say we have a renovation project and you're starting from scratch, probably more of a question for you, Chloe. Where is the most sensible starting point in that line of work?
So we always sort of zoom out and look at the house and understand the architectural elements, kind of what is the background of the house. And it might be a mismatch, which is often the case, I'm sure you find with projects where they've had renovations over time. So it's going back to like the integrity of the building. If it's a farmhouse, what kind of elements? Well, we would think about the hardscape. So we think about the ironmongery. With a farmhouse, we'd probably go for a bronze because it goes back to those kind of agricultural roots. So we might have wrought iron details in there, or if it's a really elegant townhouse, if depending on whether we want to go for a brass or a nickel, it's much more formal. So we always think about that in terms of like our woods, whether we're going to be having a dark wood and it's a bit more contemporary, or a light oak because it's a relaxed feeling. I think starting with those points where you might have stone, is it a limestone or a marble? It makes it feel either elegant or more relaxed, more rustic, and you might split the house into different areas depending on the more formal front end and the back of house end, which is a bit more relaxed. So we kind of start with that core materials palette before we kind of look at the colours and the soft furnishings.
I'm thinking about layering in a slightly more abstract view. I'm noticing a lot of layering with stripes, patterns, and a bit more playfulness in design. How are you seeing that play out in projects you have visibility of?
I've been to a few homes where people have they've done something really sweet by hand in nurseries, which is really sweet, like children's rooms with beautiful. The stripes are really nice, and I enjoy watching. You know, anyone else enjoy watching Instagram videos and people paint them by hand. Stripes are having their moment at the moment. They're really nice, and you can use any kind of colour. It's lovely, and I think it's very personal, but in a nice way. So, you know, we find when homes sell their best, their clients have really put their personal stamp on it, and someone else that maybe doesn't have that vision because some people just don't. They love that because they feel like there's a breath of fresh air. It's not this blank canvas. They don't often want to buy a blank canvas. They want something that's turnkey, ready and vintage, and something like stripes, or I've seen polka dots. I've seen one lady, she did the Dalmatian sort of print in her bathroom. It's really nice. It's a really nice way to add that personal style and layer of shape and texture.
I think stripes tend to go with most other sort of patterns as well. You know, if you have a lot of florals in a room and you want to change it a bit, a stripe will go with the floral really well and just give it a bit more edge and make it look a bit more modern. So they'll go with other graphic patterns, but then they'll go with more abstract patterns as well. Or in a room with no pattern, a stripe is a nice way to bring in a bit of contrast.
And I can imagine that for somebody that has limited design knowledge, that's probably quite an intimidating thing, the prospect of being presented with a stripe and a floral, or other, I don't know, wallpapers or textures that wouldn't naturally go together. Chloe, would you have any kind of advice on a good starting point to kind of bring multiple patterns together?
So I think as well with pattern, it doesn't have to be all the same scale. I think something very small, like a ticking stripe, where it's a really fine stripe, is a really nice way. Or if someone's a bit intimidated, I say start with playing with textures. Whether you're selecting a colour palette and say your room is predominantly earthy tones, you might play them with velvets and linens together, and then maybe a herringbone wool. And that is still a contrast and it's still subtle patterns. And then you can add more. I'd say start with kind of your core palette and then play around with cushion covers and lampshades. They're like the easiest way, but get your staple sort of material stuff that you really like and you feel safe with, and then you can build over time.
So that's a comfortable kind of non-permanent way to do it, just to kind of test the waters and determining. That sounds great.
Exactly.
So the bigger kind of more establishing parts of a room are obviously the paint colours, the walls, etc. So I know in your projects, Chloe, you stick to those earthy tones. Is there anything that
particularly determines that when you approach a project?
I think it's also thinking about the mood of the room, whether your bedroom feels really cozy and dark and intimate or a really bright and airy space. And I think that kind of follows throughout your house. And something we often do when we're kind of designing a whole house is we'll have a little tray for each room and we'll have the colour palettes out and we can kind of see how it flows. And I think often you might see one room where we've gone for a slightly bolder colour and it either stands out because it doesn't quite work or it's still part of the colour palette we've chosen, but it's just a much more intense version. And I think that's a really nice way of seeing what you feel comfortable with, or suddenly going, actually, I love this pink, but it's just not quite right with what we've gone for. I tend to go with sort of natural materials and colour palettes that occur naturally, whether from like natural pigments that would have been made over time. But there's no reason why you can't add a splash of a brighter colour, but still within that colour palette, if that makes sense.
And then bringing all of those elements together. So we've kind of got the potential wall dressings or wall colours, and we spoke a lot about lighting and shades. How do you feel that the finishes play into those kind of broader design choices?
I think that the things you touch often, it's really important to think about the finish. So we were talking earlier about switches, you know, a toggle switch is just a really nice thing to use. And when you are turning the lights off, on and off several times a day, it's something that you're going to be using a lot. The handles on your bathroom and kitchen cabinetry, that kind of thing, it's really worth thinking about how you want that to feel. You know, wood and different types of metal feel completely different, and obviously plastic if it comes to switches. So it's really paying attention to those and thinking about how often you are actually going to be using them.
Yeah. I know, Chloe, that's something that you consider very early in the renovation journey. What would your best advice be for selecting those details?
I think practicality again. I think things like doorknobs look absolutely beautiful and in the right home they're brilliant, but from a practicality perspective, if you've got a young busy family, you're always carrying things up and down the stairs, fiddling with the doorknob sometimes isn't the easiest route. So it's thinking about all of those things, and then the kind of style that you're trying to evoke. You've got much more sort of contemporary door handles, all your more traditional ones with kind of the details on them, and that language then evokes a sense of feeling in the home, and it also helps play on the other architectural elements that we spoke about earlier, like your panelling, your picture lights. So it's a really important part because you're going to have that throughout the house, and that creates that sense of flow, really, that then everything else is built on top of.
I like that you've touched upon kind of the traffic in spaces and how much they, these items are used. And obviously there are lots of different finishes available. Some change in time and some don't. So what's your view on patina on finishes?
To your point I think they tell us a really nice story. The patina of a product, we sell a lot of older homes, and we'll find that they'll often come with their original marble fireplace or their original brass door handles and door plates in a Victorian or Edwardian or even Georgian home. And sometimes we'll see that clients have purposely put them back in, they've reclaimed them, and that they'll often have patina. They're not new products, they're something that's reclaimed or to be left there for a very long time, and it tells a story, and it's just really nice, and it tells the age of a home really well. It wears a lot of products will wear really well, like an antique brass. We've just put antique brass in, and I'm really excited to see the aging process because I think it shows signs of life within a home. You know, you can create a really beautiful space, but if you feel scared to always live in that space, what's the point of making that beautiful space? So it has to have a balance. You know, you want it to be this wonderful space that is like your sanctuary, but also your space that you enjoy the most. I think that's a really nice sign of life living there. And again, when you said earlier about it's the things that you touch the most, we find that those things add value, and when they're continued throughout the whole house and there's a theme of colour or a theme of style, you know, the sockets and switches match, it does uplift that feel, and it gives a feeling of luxury. And it can be an investment when you're doing a whole home, but that in the grand scheme of things, when you're selling a home that's over £1 million, it helps to add that value. And it just, as I said, I went a long way from patina there, but I think it's a really nice way of adding something that shows signs of life and feels like it adds value as well.
Yeah, that's really beautiful. And then when we're talking about layering all these different details, so the finishes, materials, etc., is there a particular combination that you either see or kind of feel are the most harmonious to you naturally?
I think there's a lot of worry about mixing metals, and we touched on this a little bit earlier. I think one mixing the metals is quite a nice way of allowing you to sort of broaden your design look. Often people will buy a house and it's already got some existing fixtures and budget doesn't allow, or it's not quite sustainable to replace everything, and I don't think you need to. I think bathroom sanitary ware, often it just looks beautiful and just like a nickel, it's timeless, but then layering that with some antique brass lighting, a mirror, is a really nice way of marrying the two. I think people were quite worried about it, and I think as long as you're kind of mindful with it and you're making sure that your lighting kind of corresponds with one or the other and you haven't got three competing against each other, it can work really well. I think looking at your window casements, all of your fittings there, how then does that is maybe your determining point, and then your door handles and switches is another. So I think for a more contemporary look, a silver and a bronze work quite well together, but equally the brass works really well with a nickel and silver too, or bronze is more contemporary, but I think they all can marry together, but probably just mix two, not three.
In our bathroom, we have on the outside, we have bronze sockets and switches, obviously in the bedroom, and then in the bathroom, we've still got the chrome sanitary ware because it just makes sense to leave it there, and it's not sustainable to just take it out to change it. And it does go quite well. Sometimes if you've got all one finish, it can look a bit done, and everything looks a bit too finished, whereas you've got layers and colours, it's nice, they complement each other well.
Yeah, you have so many fittings in a bathroom, don't you? It can be quite overwhelming trying to find sort of matching versions of every single little piece of metal that you have.
And then do you think finishes and materials should be experienced physically, visually, or both?
I quite like feeling a handle. I like to know how practical it's going to be. I think when you're just rushing around and you've got bits in your hands, you just want to know that you're going to feel that, and it's an investment, so you have to really like it. So I think going to a showroom or seeing something in a property that you like and you just go, yeah, it works with my doors, I think that's really important. And whether you're having rocker switches and the sort of toggles, thinking about those and what you like, and it's a personal preference at the end of the day, but it's something, as you said earlier, you're using all the time, so make sure that you like it.
So how do you define craftsmanship in today's very tech-forward world?
So I think it's finding someone that's an expert in their field that can make something really well and sort of talk you through the processes and explain their materials and their methods. I think that's really important, and someone that's passionate about it.
A lot of the homes that we sell, they've had some sort of element of a craftsperson come in. So they'll say, well, we have these bookshelves in the alcove or the storage handmade by a local carpenter. And I think that's really beautiful because they've not gone out and picked something that fits the space. They've had it made for them. And it's a lot more accessible than people think. It's a really beautiful way to put your own stamp on your own home.
And do you think all of those crafts that we see kind of reappearing are valued less or more than they used to be?
I don't know.
I think more these days, yeah. I think it's so, particularly with social media and Instagram, you see something that you can find from a high street brand, you'll see it in lots of different places. And actually the only way to find something that's unique is if it is if it's handmade, there's only going to be one. Even if there's a series of them, each one is going to be different. And it's, I think as Tanya was talking earlier about the stories behind vintage pieces or antiques, it's the same with something that's handmade. If it's something you've picked up on holiday or if it's something that you've found from a local maker, it will have that significance to you. You'll remember where you were when you bought it, or you'll remember the person who made it, and it will always mean more to you than a mass-produced thing.
We had a client with a Georgian house, and they had an original dresser in the house. And when I was selling the home, it was so beautiful to go around and say to buyers, this dresser is original to the house. It's about 150 years old. And that was really beautiful because the owners had done something really clever, and they'd had the rest of the dresser sort of waist up, rebuilt by a carpenter. So it matched perfectly, but you would never know unless you looked closely. But it was that story behind it. And we find that when people have made that investment into it, it's an investment in having something handmade, but when you look at the price of what you might pay a few times if a product doesn't last, for something that lasts a long time, you get so much more out of it. And to have that story to tell when it comes to selling a home, it's really beautiful because people buy into that more than ever. They see that someone else has made an investment. It's something they could tell a story on as they have guests by, a family. It's just something that carry it with them forever until the house changes hands.
So are you seeing more and more in the properties, like you may be saying, that those original features are being preserved?
Absolutely, and put back in. We see a lot of the homes that people have bought, and they'll often ask us for advice early on in the process. So they'll say, "Oh, we just bought this home, and we don't plan on selling, but if we do want to sell, we'll come to you," and that's really nice. But they say, we're thinking about 2 or 3 years ahead of now, and we want to do this, this, and this. What should we do to add the most value? And sometimes, if they go in, if that go around, of having a look, and I sort of say, "Oh, are you thinking about putting the cornice back in, for instance, or some cabinetry in the alcoves?" Because sometimes that's quite an original thing. Sometimes there would have been storage built in those spaces, and people have taken that over the years. Things like putting fireplaces back in with a beautiful marble. Some of my clients have been quite savvy. I sold a property for a head of the Victorian Society, and he sort of said, "Well, that iron fireplace shouldn't go there, it should be marble." And it's having that iron and having a professional in, like an interior designer, that would know what materials go where, and the stories that they have of the age and how they work well with the space. I mean, okay.
So in terms of integrating those pieces back in, like where does somebody start with finding materials or the person to put something like that back into a home?
I think we are very good at kind of working with local artisans, so I think that's really important to us. Finding someone, if we don't know the knowledge, finding out someone else that will. If you've got a heritage building, you might enlist a heritage consultant to advise on the history of your property, which parts are particularly worth preserving and maybe restoring. They might be able to advise if you've got original floorboards that are lurking underneath something else that you might want to find. And then working with really, really good craftsmen. I think when you've got a lovely property and you're trying to enhance it, working with the best people that you can afford to make sure they're looking after it. We have selected kind of contractors that we trust, that we know will take care of the property as much as we choose to, being sympathetic and using the right materials, and also making the most out of it. We were sort of talking about investing in that kind of custom service. If you've got a property where you've got like an old staircase, and we worked on a lovely cottage with a spiral staircase, but there was still a little bit of space under that staircase, and this cottage didn't have a lot of storage, so we built this custom wine storage under the stairs, which looks beautiful, but it's taken a little bit back that we can use but still looks in keeping, and you just can't get that from an off-the-shelf piece sometimes.
You touched upon affordability a little bit there, and in the grand scheme of having bespoke, maybe it's a cabinetry, cornicing, or fireplaces, either put back in or kind of made to fit property. That for a lot of people seems quite out of budget. What's your view on kind of how to integrate that into a budget? Is it as expensive as a living?
I think if you're finding a really small local firm, which are often brilliant, people can be surprised actually at how affordable it can be. And I think it's also prioritizing your budget. I think what is important versus what you can be a bit more flexible on and build up over time. I think it's getting the essentials right and investing money in things that will last, and also preserving what you've got. And we were talking about kind of new technologies, things like buying a new sofa or getting it in a stain repellent fabric, so it's going to last the test of time. And a lot of suppliers now do really good warranties as well, so making sure when you are investing, you're buying something that if something goes wrong with it, they're going to repair it for you so it grows with you.
So there's a lot to be said about something you could end up buying multiple times over your lifetime. If you love it, you can buy it, splurge a little bit and buy it once, or make that investment into a piece, especially if you love it, because it's going to carry you through years to come, and you can have it repaired or replaced, or parts of it replaced. And just that upkeep is so much nicer than having that constant. It's not sustainable to constantly changing things. So having that piece that you can take through for years to come is really nice.
Yeah. I see more and more that kind of juxtaposition of old and new, and I think we touched on essences of it already. And maybe a question for you, Jess. So how are you seeing that play out in projects globally, I suppose?
Yeah, I think it is. There is. I think there was a time when sort of minimalism was very, very fashionable, and you had these very perfect looking rooms that you would see in all the interiors magazines. But in terms of actually living with that kind of look, it's really difficult. If you've got a brand new pristine room, it looks amazing when it's new, but as soon as you have a scuff in the paintwork, it looks terrible. Whereas if you have a mix of older pieces, sort of antiques, finishes, patinated finishes, things like that, it just makes the whole space feel more comfortable, because you don't feel like as soon as there's a flaw, it's destroyed. It can change with you, and it's a much easier way to live.
So in terms of those pieces within those spaces that do stand the test of time, is there something you walk into a property automatically signals quality and that kind of sustainability to you?
I think it's really a mix of things. It is the finishes that you have in things like kitchens and bathrooms. It's the flooring. It's some of the pieces of furniture. It's really kind of thinking about it holistically, I suppose. And but finishes, I think, play such an important part in that, and nothing that's too trend led as well. I think there can be something that's super trendy. We were talking earlier about rose gold that had a moment, and you can invest in something quite expensive, a metal piece, and then actually realize a couple of years later it feels of its time. A few years ago, it doesn't feel like it's really relevant anymore. Whereas some of the older finishes that you see, you know that even if it goes out of fashion, it will come back into fashion, and it doesn't really matter because it's beautiful anyway.
And that's a really good point, actually, bringing us slightly backwards into thinking about materials and finishes. Which materials and finishes, not bar, we've spoken about what makes it feel harmonious to you, but which are timeless in your view?
I think things like you mentioned sheepskin. I think sheepskin's really beautiful, and I think it's sustainable. It lasts a very long time. It looks nice. It's warm. It's functional. And things like wool. A lot of the materials that can be repurposed and recycled are really nice. But I like brass. I lean into warmer colours as well because I'm an autumn, so I love that kind of feel of warmth. And yeah, I think those are really nice materials. Yeah.
Yeah, I think as well, your textures, things like a velvet is always a real classic, and whether that's just a cushion, I think it's having a nod to those things, and anything natural, again, it feels very authentic and sort of grounded. Anything really synthetic or kind of overly bold can sometimes feel a bit out of place and maybe a bit more prone to dating.
And as we've also spoken about, if you are inclined to integrate something into a space that is a little bit more trend led, make it a smaller feature in the room. So I think, you mentioned maybe a cushion or a soft furnishing, a piece of artwork might be appropriate. What other things might play a part of that?
I think bedding and a lot of people sometimes will lean into like cushions. I think the good thing is about soft furnishings is they're not, say for instance you had an upholstered bed and you bought it in a trendy colour or style because it was in trend, not because you loved it. You'd then be thinking about replacing that, which is not financially or environmentally sustainable. And I think when you buy cushions and bedding, that's something you can change if you want to. It's not too cost effective, and you can always upcycle it. Repurpose it, share it with a friend if you want. I've really leaned into linen lately. I think linen ages really well. It comes through and it's quite robust and like quite strong when you first get it. It's quite harsh, but actually where you wash it, it gets softer and softer, and that's the same for curtains as well. I think the same curtains. I mean, I picked curtains that were quite neutral to what with our bedroom, but they really stand the test of time and they were an investment piece. But
I think table linens as well. I mean, if you have a dining table, particularly if you have a dining table in your, an open plan living dining kitchen area, just putting a tablecloth on can completely change the room. And it's, you can just do that for one night and then take it off and put something else on or leave the table bare. And that can make a really big impact. And that is something where, we all want new things sometimes, even if we don't need them. We buy new clothes all the time when we probably don't need to, but just because we feel, we need or we want something new. And I think it's the same with your home, but you don't need to make a very expensive change. You can get a tablecloth or a cushion or something, and that can be all it takes to really satisfy that craving.
or shade. They use steamer shades anyway, weren't you?
Yeah, and I think even with your dining table, thinking about a focal point on your coffee table, you've got some beautiful candles here. Changing the colour of your dinner candles can create such a different atmosphere. Going autumn, sort of a browny, chocolatey colour is a really nice way. And then your classic white is like a much more elegant sort of setting. Really tiny elements that add that playfulness is a really good way, or literally like a table lamp, or even the actual candlestick holders, changing the colour to a brass from a black or a bronze. It totally can change the feel, but it's something you're going to sit with every day. Faux flowers or fresh flowers, you can change with the seasons. That's a really nice way of updating.
I was just thinking that I love flowers, and the other day I had a set of orange flowers in our bedroom, and they died. So I replaced them with white, and it's like, oh, this feels like a new room, because I'd made it a really nice focal point in the middle of the window bay. And the other day, I quite like roses, so I always buy them. And my boyfriend bought me some sunflowers the other day, and sunflowers are so vibrant and happy in a space, and it's sustainable because you're not then constantly changing something that you can't put back to the earth. You can change your flower colours often and get a new, when they die and we get a new one, a new bunch, you can get a different colour, and you can test that really well. That can then lead into your interior. So actually, I really love red roses. I could get a red cushion, and that would go really well with my leather sofa, because you've got that nice contrasting colours there.
And that's a really lovely, like, economical way to test things out, actually. Thank you. So to finish off, I know I planted a little seed earlier around crafts that you really value. It would be really good to understand which craft you think needs to be better preserved for future generations.
That's a good one.
Yeah.
I think that good carpentry, I mean, we talked about with vintage pieces, and you'll go to a vintage fair and you might buy a dresser. It's so nice that people can build pieces inside the home that are fixed and they're permanent, like a really beautiful kitchen, a utility, a dresser, vanity unit, wardrobes. And those are all spaces that add value to the home, by the way. Whenever I think about value, people have added storage into a bathroom or anywhere that aforementioned places, that they do really add value. So I think good craftsmanship, I think for me, something that should be really preserved is a good carpenter. And I think you can even get carpenters that are local, bigger firms, small independents that can come make you a piece in your house, and that will just stand with you and last you forever. That's seen by the fact you can go to antique fairs and buy an old piece and bring it home with you, and then it will just live forever.
It's looked after, of course.
I think furniture making as well, it's something that is really hard to keep going because it's so much cheaper to buy something that's been made in a factory abroad and then shipped here. It is more of an investment to buy a piece of furniture that's made locally to you, or at least made in the UK. But then it's a nice feeling to know that you are supporting that industry, and that it's something that hasn't travelled halfway across the world, in terms of sustainability, and sort of upholstery as well. There are lots of amazing upholsterers that can just make an old piece of furniture look completely new. It's such an important skill. And again, sort of in the future, just to, like we were talking about earlier, updating things rather than replacing them it's important to have those skills.
Upholstery is a really beautiful one, actually. I think there's as few and far between now upholsterers. I think they come back for the people that are, turning their home spaces into a working area, that got a workshop at home. I know of a lady that turned her garage into a workshop, and she's such a craft. It's beautiful, and you could have an upholstered headboard that you think actually that I bought it when it was trendy and actually want to change it now. It doesn't mean you have to change the whole bed. You can kind of have it reupholstered and repurposed, and it feels like it's moving with you, growing with you as a person, even down to cushion. You can have, I've got some curtain material, I've got leftover fabric, I'll have that made by, into some, put some lovely pillowcases or something. So yeah, I think upholstery is a really good one.
I think, just to add, I would completely agree with everything you've said. And then curtains as well. I think curtains are such an important feature in having the right curtains. As much as it's easy to go and buy a pair of off-the-shelf curtains, actually choosing a fabric that you love is such a big factor in the room. And choosing this type of window treatment for that space, having someone to work with who can advise you, and especially if you've got a little cottage or something where the light is maybe limited, having some advice on the right kind. And I think there's so many crafts out there that have been existent for such a long time that are sort of dying back, and it's getting that advice to make sure you're making the best decisions.
We recently, sorry to come back again on that, we recently had curtains handmade, and the craftsmanship, and lady came round, she installed them, which I wasn't expecting, and I thought I'd have to go and pick them up and take them back. And she turned up to my home, installed them, and then she tied them at the bottom and said, you need to leave them, they need to find their way. And it was just it was really eye-opening to me that I paid someone to craft this from, a roll of material, and the craftsmanship in it, the pleats are just so beautiful. And I had mine floor to ceiling, so I thought I can take them wherever now, because they'll last me forever. And they were an investment, but they're really beautiful. They make the space feel warm, and they're just a nice investment. They bring me joy when I go into my bedrooms. So yeah, I think that curtain making is really good work.
Ending. And I want to say that I agree with everything that you guys have said, and you raised some really, really interesting points that I'm sure will be helpful to everybody around things to value and prioritise within the design process. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.